So I'm talking to Peter Stevens, the eminent designer. Peter, in a long and distinguished career involving so much, working with so many famous names, one of the high spots, I imagine, was your Jaguar XJR-15 story. Would that be correct?
It's absolutely correct, because the thing with the 15 was, it was a turning point in the way in which I was designing cars, but part of it was actually the tools and pieces I was using to do the drawing changed from the very rigid nature when you were using the fabled magic markers, and that's what I had started with at Ford, and it was quite difficult to do, or impossible to do, soft shapes. We used to laughingly say, for example, the Mark I Golf and Sirocco, which were designed by Ital Design, if you wanted to draw a Golf, you got a cool grey 2 band, a cool grey 3 and a cool grey 4, and that gave you the facets of a Golf. If you wanted a Sirocco, then you went a 2, a 4 and a 6, because Sirocco was more faceted dramatically. And so that was a kind of, and you ended up using those tools, doing those kind of cars.
Yes.
You know, and I wanted to really to escape from, because it was called folded, either folded paper, folded cardboard,
Origami.
a little bit disparaging in the name of that. So, and it came at a point where I started drawing in a different way, because I wanted to be able to express the form much more clearly than facets and crisp lines between them. And
it ended up a very soft, more rounded shape. Was this for aerodynamic or aesthetic reasons?
Well,
or a combination?
It's really a combination, because when I was at Jaguar doing vehicle design, I was interested in aerodynamics because I'd met a guy who ran the aero department at Imperial College, which was just across the street from where we are. And we talked about me taking one of my RCA projects into the wind tunnel to see how it worked, you know, whereupon you could see, and what I liked is that during the course of an afternoon, you could see you had made design progress because the drag coefficient came down, or the wildly lifting front end was under control. So very quickly, you know, I got an evaluation of my design work, which was a nice thing, because I used to cynically say, you wait 4 years to see if you had a good idea when the car goes into production, and nobody buys it, then it probably wasn't a good idea on my part or the company's part. So I could see very quickly that I was making progress, but also that curve thing, it actually gave you more opportunities to tune the form and the surfaces, you know, because the reason you can read the shape of a car is because of the way the light falls on it, or the way things are reflected on the side. So both the play of light and the reflections are part of what tells you the shape of the car, you know, and so to be able to have those more under control with these curved surfaces, for me, was much more satisfying.
And this was a significant car in that it was the first production car to be totally carbon
Yeah, a carbon structure.
Carbon structure.
Absolutely, it was. It was, that came about because Tony Southgate, who designed the Jaguar race car, the Le Mans winning cars,
XJR-9s, etc.
Yeah, and even from like XJR-7, it's interesting because when he was asked by Tom to do a car that would beat Porsche with the 956 and 962, which were just phenomenally successful, I mean, just remarkably successful.
Yes.
And he actually went along and had a chat. He was a young designer then, and he had a chat with Patrick Head at Williams, and he said, what's the one thing I can do that will be a big step ahead from Porsche? And Patrick Head said to him, well, you've got to get the carbon. That way you make a much stiffer structure. That way you know what the suspension's doing, and you can be in control of that instead of the car bending a bit, which is suspension that is not under your control because it's twisting around.
Yes.
And so that caused Tony to do, at first the 7 and then the 8 as carbon structures, moving on to the 9. All the time, he was both taking out weight and increasing stiffness, and so that was the point at which, when I was talking to Tom said, well, we're going to do a road car and it's going to be carbon fibre, and that will be an absolute breakthrough, which it certainly was. Because at Lotus I was doing GRP, but that's glass reinforced polyester, which is fiberglass. But that wasn't, you couldn't get much stiffness out of it, especially if you then design one of these flat surface, sharp edges, it would twist. Yes. So in other words, if the body was carbon instead, then that contributed to the stiffness, particularly if the basic structure and chassis was carbon.
Yes.
You got something which would be like 10 times as stiff, at which point you could understand what the suspension was doing and how you could tune it. So the thing that's flopping around, you can, make every adjustment to springs and dampers, and it don't make any difference at all. Once you have a stiff structure, you have all that under control.
That's very interesting indeed, Peter, as ever. Talking to you is always fascinating. So this is very much your story. It's the whole story from how you sort of got into design right the way through, working with Tom Walkinshaw, developing the car design, building it. We've got some fabulous material that you've brought to the whole project, to the book. And have you enjoyed writing the book?
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, the interesting thing is, having brought along all these, and especially contemporary reports about it, I've forgotten that I was very conscientious in gathering the material together, because it wasn't really done. I mean, it's interesting because the books that Sterling Moss did, he collected and saved every bus ticket, every little ticket going into a French lavatory somewhere, and you've got this tiny little printout. He collected every single thing. I didn't know that at all at the time, and when I have been writing the book and then I found all these things that I kept, I surprised myself at how diligent I was, because I didn't have any thought at the time that this might become a book. I did enjoy the project enormously, and I liked to read the press reports, not because I could read that I'd done something nice, but because I could learn from it about things that people didn't find too satisfactory, and make sure that with the next project I had some of that in mind. But it was fun. I mean, it was fun, which meant that writing the book was, it's funny because we first talked about the book during the lockdown period, and I thought, piece of cake, because I don't have anything else to do. But in fact, during that period, more than half the day was spent just trying to stand still and not slip backwards in terms of the house and the garden and chickens and all that stuff. So I didn't really, and I thought I'd crack on with it, but I didn't.
But you have now.
I have now,
and here we are.
And it's been super good fun. I mean, it's very nice that Porter Press as well are interested in it. I mean, the fact that it says Jaguar somewhere is obviously interesting to a lot of the books you do, and that's just fine. But also at the time, I always had this idea that a designer's job was to understand the history and culture of a car company and turn that knowledge into a three-dimensional product. Because when I went to do some work with Lamborghini, and a couple of Italian journalists said to me, and I'm not going to do an Italian accent, but they said, how can you, an English person, come to Lamborghini and tell us what a Lambo should be like? And I said, because that's what designers should do. And they should understand the company, take on board all that history and culture.
The ethos,
And if it's with Lamborghini, then make a Lamborghini. If it's with Lotus, then it's a Lotus, and that's kind of what designers should do. I mean, there are designers who give you what they've got in mind, or what they took to somebody else who didn't like it, and so they then say, well, turn it into this, that, or the other. And I think that's a strange way of working, because that means you haven't understood the company you're working for.
Indeed, absolutely. Well, Peter, we're absolutely delighted to be publishing this book. It's a very important car, in all sorts of ways, and it's a terrific story, absolutely fascinating. So thank you very much indeed for writing it.
Well, it should. I mean, the thing I would say is it's a personal view of the project, because I wasn't an employee of Tom Walker Racing, TWR. And actually that was better because I was looking at the company kind of from outside, so I wasn't involved in things like internal politics, which I'm sure were going on, so I haven't needed to write about internal politics, because it's the same with things like chassis numbers. You know, people still say to me, you know, and it might be either online or they message me or something, and they say, what about that story of McLaren F1 051? And I say, I haven't a clue what you're talking about, because at the time we didn't link chassis numbers to anything, and chassis numbers weren't particularly interesting to us at all. And in a way it's the same with 15s, you know, we only made 50 of them. Yeah. So everyone is special.
Absolutely.
Yeah? Everyone will be a tiny bit different because a lot of it was hand finished.
Yes.
So chassis numbers don't bother me. I mean, the first car prior to the 50 was what was a TWR project. It was called R9R. Yeah, and that was interesting because that's where we found out how to build the things, really. Yeah, so that's interesting. But beyond that, I kind of don't mind, because I think, well, they're all pretty good, you know.
Absolutely.
It's not crucial.
Wonderful, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Peter.